Imagine waking up tomorrow to a world where the green paper sitting in your wallet is suddenly worthless on the global stage. For nearly a century, one currency has ruled humanity. It bought oil in the Middle East, grain in Europe, electronics in Asia, and backed the central treasuries of almost every sovereign nation on Earth. The United States dollar was not merely money, it was the undisputed bedrock of global power, a financial superpower far more dominant than any military empire in human history. But beneath the surface of international commerce, a quiet rebellion is gathering momentum. From Beijing to Moscow, New Delhi to Riyadh, nation-states are making a calculated historic shift. They are quietly liquidating American debt, trading in local currencies, and stockpiling physical gold at rates not seen in generations. For the first time in 80 years, the global monetary order is fracturing. What happens if the world stops using the dollar? What happens when the ultimate weapon of American hegemony is stripped of its power? To understand how we reached the brink of this economic earthquake, we must travel back to July 1944. World War II was grinding toward its bloody conclusion. European nations were devastated, their industrial infrastructure shattered, and their national gold reserves severely depleted. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the United States stood as an industrial colossus, holding over 70% of the world's official monetary gold reserves. Recognizing their unprecedented leverage, representatives from 44 allied nations gathered in the quiet mountain town of Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. Their mission was to design a new monetary system that would rebuild the global economy and prevent future financial chaos. The agreement reached was simple, yet revolutionary. Rather than tying every individual currency directly to gold, the world agreed to peg their national currencies to the United States dollar. The dollar itself would be anchored to physical gold at a fixed, guaranteed rate of $35 per ounce. The world trusted America because every dollar bill was theoretically backed by pure gold sitting safely inside Fort Knox. If a foreign nation accumulated dollars through trade, they could present those paper dollars to the United States Treasury and receive physical gold in return. The Bretton Woods system made the dollar the undisputed global reserve currency, handing Washington a level of economic dominance unprecedented in modern history. For nearly 3 decades, this gold-backed system fueled global economic recovery. But as the 1960s unfolded, severe structural flaws began to emerge. The United States government engaged in massive domestic social spending while simultaneously pouring hundreds of billions of dollars into the Vietnam War. To fund these massive deficits, Washington printed far more paper dollars than it held in gold reserves. Foreign central banks, particularly in France and West Germany, quickly noticed the discrepancy. Sensing danger, French President Charles de Gaulle demanded that America convert France's vast dollar reserves back into physical gold, sending French naval vessels across the Atlantic to retrieve ton after ton of gold bullion directly from American vaults. A catastrophic run on Fort Knox was underway. Enter United States President Richard Nixon. On the evening of Sunday, August 15, 1971, Nixon preempted regular television programming to address a startled nation. Unilaterally, without consulting international allies or Congress, Nixon announced the temporary suspension of the dollar's convertibility into gold. What was framed as a temporary emergency measure became known in history as the Nixon Shock. In a single evening, Nixon severed the golden tether that held the global economy together. The dollar was no longer backed by anything physical. It became a pure fiat currency, valuable only because the United States government declared it to be so, and because the world had no immediate alternative. With the gold standard destroyed, the dollar faced immediate collapse. Foreign nations began questioning why they should hold paper money that was backed by nothing more than political promises. Nixon and his strategic advisor, Henry Kissinger, knew they needed a new anchor, a resource even more vital to modern civilization than gold. That resource was crude oil. In 1973, in the wake of the Arab oil embargo, Kissinger flew to Saudi Arabia to strike a masterstroke deal that would reshape global finance for the next half-century. The agreement was brilliant in its strategic simplicity. The United States guaranteed the survival, weapons supply, and military protection of the Saudi royal house. In exchange, Saudi Arabia agreed to price all of its oil exports exclusively in United States dollars and to invest their surplus oil revenues back into American Treasury bonds. Because every industrial nation on Earth needed oil to power its factories, fuel its transport systems, and heat its cities, every nation on Earth now needed dollars. To buy oil, a country like Japan, Germany, or India had to export real physical goods to America to earn greenbacks. This gave birth to the Petrodollar system. Suddenly, world demand for the dollar soared far beyond what it had ever been under the gold standard. America had discovered the ultimate economic superpower. Whenever Washington needed money to fund foreign wars, build infrastructure, or bail out Wall Street banks, it could simply print trillions of dollars out of thin air. Any other nation doing this would suffer hyperinflation and currency collapse. But because the entire world required dollars for oil and international trade, America exported its inflation to the rest of the planet. Global central banks hoarded dollars as foreign exchange reserves, effectively loaning their hard-earned wealth back to the United States at extremely low interest rates. Furthermore, Western nations established the SWIFT messaging network, an international banking communication system that routed global money transfers through American oversight. The dollar was no longer just a national currency. It was the central operating system of global capitalism. For decades, this arrangement seemed unbreakable. But the ultimate strength of a global reserve currency relies on trust, neutrality, and stability. In February 2022, following the escalation of the conflict in Ukraine, the United States and its Western allies committed what many economists consider a fatal geopolitical blunder. They weaponized the global financial system. Overnight, Washington froze approximately $300 billion of Russian sovereign foreign exchange reserves held in Western banks and disconnected major Russian financial institutions from the SWIFT banking system. While intended as a decisive economic strike against Moscow, the move sent a profound shockwave through central banks across the globe. Developing nations, monarchies, and rising economic powers looked at Washington's actions and realized a terrifying truth. If your national reserves are held in dollars, you do not truly own them. You hold them at the sole discretion of the United States government. If you disagree with Washington's foreign policy, your nation's sovereign wealth can be erased with the press of a key. This realization triggered a rapid, unprecedented acceleration of de-dollarization. The BRICS alliance, consisting of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, alongside newly admitted energy superpowers like Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Iran, began constructing alternative trade and financial settlement systems. China and Russia shifted almost their entire bilateral trade to the yuan and ruble. India began purchasing Russian crude oil using rupees and dirhams. Crucially, Saudi Arabia publicly announced that it was open to selling oil in non-dollar currencies, effectively dismantling the very foundation of the 1973 Petrodollar agreement. The unraveling of dollar dominance will not happen overnight, but the geopolitical trajectory is now irreversible. What happens if the world stops using the dollar? The long-term consequences for the United States and the global economy will be profound. For over 50 years, constant foreign demand for dollars allowed Washington to accumulate over $34 trillion in national debt without facing immediate economic reckoning. If central banks around the world systematically reduce their dollar reserves, those excess dollars will slowly flood back to American shores. This sudden surge of domestic currency, coupled with declining global demand, would trigger severe, persistent inflation inside the United States. The Federal Reserve would be forced to keep interest rates historically high to attract reluctant buyers for government debt, drastically raising borrowing costs for ordinary American citizens, businesses, and the federal government itself. Mortgage rates would skyrocket, national debt interest payments would consume the federal budget, and the era of effortless American deficit spending would come to a sudden, painful end. The global financial system would shift from a unipolar monetary order dominated by Washington to a multipolar landscape where trade is settled in a basket of regional currencies, sovereign digital currencies, and physical commodities like gold. The dollar will not disappear overnight, but its era of absolute, unchecked global supremacy is drawing to a close. The global economy is entering an uncharted frontier, where real power belongs not to the nation that prints the paper, but to those who control the real resources of the world.